a few things with you. I want to give you an idea what's happening in the leadership landscape today. What we're seeing, and this is it's going to be slanted to some degree towards pastors, but so much of this is true for anybody that's in a helping profession, anybody that's leading an organization. A lot of these stats that we're going to talk about in just a minute apply. So don't let the fact that I've got pastor up there throw you. This is relevant whether you're going into, look, we're all in the ministry, right? I mean, I was in the ministry for 20 years in technology. You know, heathens need to be pastored too, right? And so I think you'll find this, hopefully you'll find this applicable. If you have questions, just stop me, fire away, I'll do my best to answer them, okay? And if I say something that you don't agree with, that doesn't bother me at all. You just say, John, I don't agree with that, and we'll have a nice dialogue, okay? All right, so let's talk about, for just a minute, the current leadership landscape as it relates, especially as it relates to attrition in mental health. We know this for a fact that over 1,000 pastors in the United States leave the ministry every month. Now, that's a conservative number. Some estimates put it up as high as 1,700 a month, and I don't know if you've heard of Emerge Ministries in Ohio. John Palmer is the leader of that organization, and a few months ago he said he thinks it's about 2,000 a month that just say, I'm done, I quit, and they're not leaving to go to another church, they're just done with the ministry. So that's a big number. 4 out of 10 pastors suffer with depression. The most recent research that I have on it is from 2015 by an organization called xpastor.com, which is kind of catchy if you think about that. They're saying 4.7 out of 10 now. So we're almost at the 50% level of depression with pastors. And for their spouses, it's even worse. Their spouses have a higher rate of depression than even their pastors. So it's significant. It's a significant issue. Here's a scary number, and Doug, maybe you want to just not see this, but 50% of Bible seminary graduates who entered the ministry will leave the ministry within 5 years. Now, how are we going to get the Great Commission done if we don't fix that? It's going to be very difficult to do. So that number, all of these numbers bug me. That one might bug me the most. The vast majority of pastors' spouses report that the ministry has produced a negative impact on their families, and a large percentage of leaders have no close personal friends. It's amazing how isolating leadership can be. And if you're in vocational leadership, vocational ministry, even more so. There's more isolation there. And if you pastor in a small town, it's even worse. So it's a pretty ugly landscape out there. And I want you to know that because I want you to know what you're getting into. And what I don't want you to do is say, oh, I better change my major. No, what you need and I need is a game plan. We need a game plan. And so I want to talk with you today about a game plan that you can start right now that will help you avoid going through what I went through. And I'm going to give you a little more detail about that in a minute. Depression is highly preventable. It's a lot easier to prevent than it is to cure. It's a lot cheaper to prevent than it is to cure. It will save you. Prevention will save you not only a lot of money, it will save you a lot of years. Because when I got depressed, for 2 years I led our church while I was in major depression. Don't ask me how that happened. I have no clue how I made it through that. But for a period of time, 3 or 4 or 5 years, I held a job, but boy, I was just barely hanging on. And so I don't want any of you to go through that. And I'd like you to get in front of it before you leave this university so that you don't ever have to go through that. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to talk with you for a few minutes about a strategy that will help you with that. We're going to talk about learning how to refuel emotionally. I'm going to share a scripture with you, and then I'm going to give you a little more detail about my personal story. I just touched on it in chapel. I want to give you a little bit more detail. So here's the scripture. Proverbs 19:8 says this: "He who gets wisdom loves his own soul." He who gets wisdom loves his own soul. And the need for loving my own soul came home to me it's almost 24 years ago to the day. November of 1992. I'd been a Christian at that time for 18 years and a pastor for 12 by that time. And I gave my life to Jesus when I was 16 years old at a little coffee house in Saginaw, Michigan, where Petra was playing. And it's amazing I can hear today after sitting in that room. It was a small little room, and they, obviously they had it cranked up, but I gave my life to Jesus when I was 16. And for me, it was a very dramatic conversion. I had been using drugs, drinking. I was a nasty person. I was very close to addiction. And God miraculously delivered me from alcohol and drugs and all of that stuff. And so I loved God from a very early age because I was such a mess, and He just transformed my life. So I understood the commandment. When Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Greek word as is os, omega sigma. It means in the same manner as. Love your neighbor in the same manner as you love yourself. Now loving God for me from age 16 moving forward was very easy. So that wasn't hard for me. Loving my neighbor, a little harder, right? But at least I knew I was supposed to do that. I had no clue that there was a third part to that command, and that was to love myself. Now, loving yourself doesn't mean selfishness. It doesn't mean self-absorption. It doesn't mean being narcissistic. It's how you treat yourself and how you talk to yourself, how you schedule your life, how you allow people to treat you. All of that stuff is a component of that. We're not going to talk about that in great detail, but I understood the first two parts of the greatest commandment, but I had no clue that there was this soul part of me, this mind part and emotional part of my life that needed tending. And I learned something, that what you don't know can hurt you. What you don't know can really hurt you. And so my lack of knowledge caught up to me, and in November '92, my world just came crashing down on me. Let me describe what happened. I had several very difficult events happen all at the same time, and I started to struggle with my sleep. I would go to bed about 10:30 at night, and I would lay awake till about 1 in the morning. I'd fall asleep for an hour, and then I'd wake up at like 2, and I'd be up the rest of the night. And that went on for like 3 months. So something was wrong. I just didn't know what was wrong at that time. The crisis also was including no appetite. No appetite. Now you have to understand something. I'm Polish Italian. All right? My mom was Italian. My dad was Polish. And food was a big deal in my house. I never had soup out of a can my entire life. Everything was homemade. Even the noodles were homemade. In fact, food was such a big deal at my house growing up that we took more pictures of food than people at holiday gatherings. No lie. Christmas 1986, there's the kielbasa plate, there's the ham plate, here's the raspberry cream pies made from scratch. There's very few pictures of people. But for the first time in my life, I had no appetite. I lost 30 pounds in a matter of a couple of months. How many of you know that's not a good way to lose weight? And so something was desperately wrong with me. The crisis included anxiety and a very deep sadness, and an incredibly deep awareness of emotional pain. It was like this. It was like a thick black emotional fog had just rolled into my life, accompanied by the sincere belief that my life was over. I remember calling my best friend who was here, I don't know, maybe last week or 2 weeks ago. His name is Jeff Halavin. He preached here in chapel. He's my best friend. And I called him up and I said, Jeff, my life's over. And I began to think about, how can I kill myself without it hurting too bad? And I had put a plan together to do that. Thank God for people who intervened. in my life. I thank God for my wife. I wish she could be here with me today. She's the most awesome lady. She looks like she's 30. You know, we've been married 35 years, but she's so youthful looking and beautiful, and she's beautiful on the inside too. She saved my life. She got me to the doctor. She got me to a counselor. She got friends. She got some bad people out of my life who were sucking the life out of me, and she put some good friends around me during that very difficult time in my life. And so I'm grateful for that. And here's the deal. Back in 1992, nobody talked about depression in the church. No one. They called it nerves. Or worse, they called it devil. You know, you're demon possessed. Pretty cool. Don't ever try to cast a demon out of somebody who's depressed. Please, just don't do that. Unless you're very skilled at it and you've got a lot of years of casting demons out and you discern that, okay. But the worst thing you can do is try to cast a demon out of somebody who's depressed. The worst thing you can do is give them a lecture. Don't quote Romans 8:28 to them while they're depressed. That doesn't help. How many of you know you can quote scripture out of context? So that's where I was. The church that I was pastoring, we were having our best year ever. We had to go to 2 services that year because we were growing so fast. We had record amount of people give their life to Jesus that year. More money in the offering than ever before. We had more people baptized in water and the Holy Spirit. I mean, everything was going fantastic. And I'm ready to exit. I'm just a mess. So there were a lot of things that contributed to my depression that over time caught up with me. I had, there was a general lack of kindness toward myself. I used to say things like, I'm a loser, I'm stupid, I'm an idiot. And I didn't realize that every time I did that, I was damaging myself emotionally. How many of you think it would be right for me to call Sarah those names? If I did that, all of you, rightfully so, would say, hey, bro, knock it off, right? Don't do that. It's wrong. It's sinful. It's just as sinful if I do that to myself, right? So self-talk. I had no clue about that. I had no idea of how to manage my anger. And if you're in a leadership position, in a leadership role, there will be plenty of opportunities for anger to occur because you're dealing with people, right? One of the biggest surprises I had in the ministry was that difficult people go to church. I thought everybody who went to church was nice. And boy, was I in for a rude awakening as a leader. Not everybody who goes to your church is nice. And so I had to learn how to deal with my anger, and I didn't do a very good job with that. Now, this is my Michigan football coach now, Mr. Harbaugh, but he does have some anger issues, as you might well know. I had no clue about how to deal with abusive people. My parents never sat down with me and said, hey, John, here's how you manage people that want to abuse you. I had no idea. So what did I do as a Christian and as a pastor? I just let people say whatever they wanted to say, do whatever they wanted to do to me, because that's what good pastors do. And I was totally ignorant about how to refuel emotionally. And that's what I want to talk about with you for the next few minutes. How to refuel emotionally. When it comes to emotional fuel, there are 3 baselines. Well, let me come back here because I want to read this scripture. In Matthew 11, Jesus said this, come to me all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you what? Rest. Notice it doesn't say I'll give you more to do. It says I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Think about that for a minute. Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. How many of you, that bothers you when you hear that? Because sometimes the things the Lord asks you to do don't feel easy and they don't feel light. But here's what I've learned, that sometimes leadership is difficult because I'm doing things God never asked me to do. There are things that I decided I needed to do. I put on myself. Am I the only one, or you guys do that too sometimes? And so that verse of Scripture has become really a life verse for me. Now, there are 3 baselines that we need to know when it comes to replenishing our emotional batteries. That's what I want to talk about for the rest of our time together tonight. How do we do that? Let me give you, here's the first baseline. You can't give what you don't have. That makes sense, right? If you have no money in your wallet, how much money can you give to missions? 0. If you have no money in your bank account, how much money can you give to a brother in need? 0, right? If you have no fuel left in the emotional tank, it is very difficult to lead and to do that with compassion, not because you're a bad person, it's because you don't have anything in the tank left to give. You can't give what you don't have. It's not possible. Second baseline is this: you are an emotional being. I'm not talking about being ruled by our emotions. I'm talking about paying attention to our emotions. Big difference, right? Paying attention. I paid no attention to my emotions, and I got in trouble. We are not just body and spirit. We're 3-part beings: body, spirit, and soul. And the soul component of our life includes our emotions. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard a Christian say this before, but some well-meaning Christians have said this to me: if you take care of the spiritual part of your life, you don't need to be concerned about your emotions. To which I respond, okay, so if I take care of my spirit, there's no need to pay attention to my body? I can eat whatever I want to eat and be a couch potato with no negative effects on my health. How ridiculous is that, right? Listen, you have 3 tanks. You have a physical tank, you have a spiritual tank, you have an emotional tank. And there are a different set of behaviors that fill those tanks. Listen, you can pray until Jesus comes back and it won't make you any thinner. You're going to have to exercise and eat right. You can exercise and eat right, and that will help you emotionally, because these tanks kind of bleed over into each other. But if you think that if I just fill up my spiritual tank, life is going to be wonderful, you're sorely mistaken. We have 3 tanks, 3 separate sets of behaviors that fill those tanks. You're not just spirit and body, you also have mind, will, and emotions. Now, I want to stop for a minute, because I've been talking for 20 minutes nonstop. Any questions or thoughts? We okay? All right. So let me give you the third baseline, and that's this. There are 3 emotional indicators that are super practical that you can pay attention to, and I can pay attention to, that will let us know how much fuel there's in the tank. You might say, well, how do I know if I've got enough fuel in there, if I'm getting low on fuel? If you look at these 3 things, you'll be able to make an educated guess about how much fuel there is in the tank. You ready? So let's look at these 3 real quick. Here's the first one: your pace. Your pace, or your schedule. Listen, your value to God has almost nothing to do with how busy you are. But in leadership, we pride ourselves on being busy. What's the first thing that most pastors say when you ask them, how you doing? Oh man, I'm so busy, right? You go to a conference with a bunch of leaders. Well, how's it going? Oh, I'm so busy. It's almost as if we're proud of that. I remember as a youth pastor back in Saginaw, we had a big youth group. We had about 200 kids in that youth group. And I was way over schedule. I was in my 20s. And I remember calling my best friend, Jeff, who I told you about a little bit earlier, and because I wanted to brag to Jeff how busy I was. How sick is that, right? But when you're in your 20s, sometimes you just don't know. So I call up Jeff, and I say, hey, Jeff, guess how many nights I got scheduled next month? Now, this kind of stuff didn't impress Jeff at all, but he said, how many? I said, 28 out of 30 nights. And you know what Jeff said to me? He said 2 words: stop sinning. How many of you know that's not what I expected? I was waiting for him to pat me on the back and tell me how awesome I was. And he said, stop sinning. You're sinning against your wife, You're sinning against yourself. We didn't have any kids at the time, but if we had kids at that time, I'd have been sinning against my kids. He said, knock it off. Aren't you grateful for people in your life that just tell you the truth when you need it? Amen. You need it. I'm so thankful for Jeff calling me out on that. Listen, not only was I lying to myself that I could sustain that pain, not only was I sinning, I was lying to myself. There is no human being on earth, well, let me say that. There may be 5 human beings on earth who can run like that month after month with no effects. But the rest of us commoners are not designed that way. We're not. God never wired us like that. So here's what I know about leaders. They tend to operate in realms of the extreme. They either work 100 hours a week or they work 2. Health is somewhere in the middle. All right? I'm not encouraging you to be lazy. I'm not encouraging you to be slothful. How many of you know God calls us to work, to be diligent, to plant, to water? However, He also has called us to know when to take our foot off the gas pedal. Put the car in the garage, put it in park, shut the garage door, and take a day off. Right? Your pace. Listen, here's another indicator, and that's your people. Your people. Ecclesiastes 4:9. 2 are better than 1 because they have what? A good return for their work. Listen, here's a great book that I think you should pick up if you want to be a leader. It's called Survive or Thrive by Jimmy Dodd. Buy my 2 books first and then buy his. That's a little plug. That was bad. It is a terrific book, Survive or Thrive by Jimmy Dodd. It talks about 6 relationships. Now, it's a book written for pastors, but again, if you're going into leadership in any way, shape, or form, this book will help you. Look, you were never meant to live life alone. When I was a pastor in the 80s, you know what my lead pastor said? Great guy. I loved working for him. But he said, John, eagles soar alone. Doug, I don't know if you ever heard that before. And what he meant was that if you really want to be an eagle, if you really want to be great for God, you got to be a loner. You realize that's ridiculous, right? Well, as a 24-year-old, I was too intimidated. Something about that didn't seem right to me, but I was too intimidated to say anything about it to him. So I just said, oh well. Look, ministry, leadership will set you up for isolation. And isolation is good in small doses, but extended isolation leads to trouble. It leads to problems. It leads to, how many of you know that if you isolate yourself long enough, you get weird? And you get bizarre. You have to chase mentors. They're not going to come looking for you. You have to chase them. You need people speaking into your life, the right kind of people, and more than one. Chase mentors, build relationships, spend time with replenishing people. Look, part of my problem was everybody that I dealt with at church, I was so messed up. I dealt with all the crazies all the time. And I never took time just to sit down with somebody who made me laugh and have fun. Somebody that filled the bucket every once in a while. Look, you and I will never reach our potential without the right kind of people in our life. We need relationships. So, how do you know how much fuel's in the tank? Let me look at your calendar. I can look at your calendar and I can tell you, I can take an educated guess how much fuel's in that tank. I can look at your calendar and see when was the last time you hung out with people just to hang out and have fun. And I can take an educated guess about where you are when it comes to your emotional fuel levels. Is this making sense? Let me give you one other indicator on that gauge, and that is your plan. I drive a 2010 Malibu, and I get the oil changed on that Malibu every several thousand miles. We rotate the tires on the car. Why do we do that? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Right, I want to extend the life of the vehicle, right? I want that thing to last longer. It's paid for, man. I want it to last. So just like I have, and you should have, a maintenance plan for your car, you can have a plan, and really this is what I want you to grab your arms around. You can build a maintenance plan today, even though you may not feel like you need it right now. How many of you have ever had a root canal? Okay, also older folks, right? Let me tell you something, you don't want a root canal. They're awful. And look, depression is like an emotional root canal. And if you can avoid it, if you can prevent it, it's so much better if you go that route. And you'll do that easier if you have a game plan. So I'm going to give you, real quick, 4 things that you need to build into your strategy for being healthy emotionally. You ready? Here's the first one. Laughter. Laughter. Proverbs 17:22 says this, a cheerful heart is what? Anybody know? Good medicine. A cheerful heart is good medicine. Laughter is a strategic part of emotional maintenance, believe it or not. How many of you here have ever felt better after a good belly laugh? Do you know that that's chemical in nature? When you have a belly laugh, your brain releases feel-good chemicals that reduce your stress and lift your mood. I'll tell you what, one of the best gifts my friends have given me is permission to laugh and have fun. I came out of ORU wound as tight as the bun in your hair. I mean, I was a bundle of nerves and stress, and I was so serious. And I was on staff with a guy who was a goofball. I needed that goofball in my life. I'd come into my office, and all my furniture would be rearranged. Back in the day, they used to send out these 3x5 cards, advertising cards in packets that thick. You know, so we would get all this ministry-related stuff in these little 3x5 flyers, if you want to call it that. So I walk into my office one day, and there's like 400 of them spread out one by one all over my office. And it's like, so I go into his office, I say, don't you have time? How do you have time for this? But he was a wild man. He came up with his own Heimlich maneuver, or the international signal for choking. Does anybody know what that is? It's this, right? He thought that was stupid. So we're in a board meeting. I'm 24 years old. I'm so nervous. I'm so uptight. We're in a board meeting, and somebody starts like choking on their food or something like that. What does my friend do? He takes off his shoe and he throws it in the air. I said, what are you doing? He said, that's the new international sign for choking. You know, it's just, I needed that guy in my life. Laughter is an important part of a game plan that will help you get healthy and stay healthy. All right? Here's the second part of the plan, and that's exercise. Boy, pastors really and leaders really make excuses for why they don't exercise. I've heard some pastors say, well, you know, Paul said to Timothy that physical training is of some value, but, you know, spiritual whatever is more important. Yeah, but you know what Paul wasn't saying there? He wasn't saying that exercise is of no value. He said some, not no. And yet a lot of leaders say, I'm too busy for that. I don't have time for that. Look, research is telling us that exercise helps us burn off nervous energy and reduce stress. When I was at ORU, Oral Roberts would talk to us about being whole men. And that meant strong in your mind, strong in your spirit, and strong in your body. And we had to do, I don't know what happens here at North Central, but I had to have every semester I had to have a physical education class at Oral Roberts. And we had to gain aerobic points, and the fastest way to gain aerobic points was to run. And I hate long distance running. I'm a sprinter. I don't like to run long distances, but that was the way to get the aerobic points. And I thought to myself, I'm studying so many hours, and I'm staying in, I'm staying faithful in my devotions every morning with you, Lord. But where am I going to squeeze in time to exercise? And it bothered me as a student, thinking, how much are you putting on? But Oral was onto something. Exercise is the last frontier for leaders. Right? We've been talking about feeding every leader in the kingdom, at least, not in the corporate world, but we understand feeding our spirit, right? And I think we can at least get our mind wrapped around the emotional component of things. And laughter is something we can get our mind, but exercise is really important. Here's what I found out, that when I've had a really stressful day, going for a long walk or going to the gym and lifting weights is therapeutic. I used to belong to a gym when I was a kid, 17, 18 years old. As a youth pastor, I was at a gym. As a lead pastor, I was at a gym for most of my lead pastor tenure. I got into the corporate world, I got lazy. And so now it's something that I know if I don't do on a regular basis, depression has a way of creeping back into my life. Exercise is a good use of your time, and it will help you refuel emotionally. Here's the third one. Boredom. Refueling emotionally requires you to inject a little bit of boring into your life every once in a while. God didn't wire you to be on high alert at all times. Being a leader is very important, but that doesn't mean that you're supposed to be on alert 24/7. He didn't make you like that. He didn't make any human being like that. Interesting, we are made in God's image, right? We all believe that? You should believe that, because that's what the Bible teaches us. And he rested on the seventh day. How many realize God didn't rest because he was tired? Right? He rested, I believe he rested while the work was complete. But I believe he also rested because he knew how ambitious we human beings get, and how we like to cram every open slot in our lives with stuff to do. So he did it to set an example for us. Now, here are some things that are boring to me, and they may be different for you. So when I want to inject a little boring into my life, I plant flowers. Boring. All I'm doing is digging in dirt, throwing something in there, covering up. Totally boring, but it's kind of refreshing. Playing golf. I stink at golf. I'm not good. I'm not good at golf. But golf doesn't thrill me. It's boring. But I need a little bit of boring to counteract all the busyness in my life. For you, it might be walking on the beach or going to an art museum. For our 25th wedding anniversary, I surprised my wife with ballroom dancing lessons. And I learned something about ballroom dancing. That when you're learning how to do the cha-cha, you're not thinking about anything important. And when you're not thinking about anything important for an hour, it can be tremendously refreshing. I mean, Laura and I had so much fun. I was stepping on her feet, and we would laugh, and we're trying to learn how to do foxtrot and salsa and rumba, and we would laugh for an hour, and we'd get out to the car, and I felt fantastic. Look, some of you need some boring. Now, again, you don't need 100 hours of boring. I'm talking about a little bit of boring, all right, to counteract the busyness. Let me give you one more maintenance item real quick, and that is sleep. It's not, actually, I don't even have a slide for that. Sleep. Do you know that skipping sleep is a bad idea? I had a pastor friend one time say these exact words. He said, sleep is a disposable commodity. And you know what I said back to him? That might be the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. And it was one of the stupidest things I think I've ever heard in my life. Sleep is not a disposable commodity. Man, when I was in college, I was operating on about 4 to 5 hours of sleep. Nuts. That's nuts. And you might get away with that when you're 18, when you're 20, when you're 22. When you get into your 30s, you're not getting away with that anymore. You can't live like that. Some of you are laughing because am I standing on a nerve or okay. All right. Here's what happens when you don't sleep. It slows your ability to process information. It hurts your ability to problem solve. It catapults your stress levels. When you sleep, your brain flushes out toxins. And when you don't get enough sleep, that process doesn't finish. Your brain repairs itself when you sleep. Here's how bad sleep deprivation is. The negative effect of sleep deprivation are so great that people who are hung over produce at a higher level than those lacking sleep. Think about that for a minute. I worked in the technology industry for 20 years. You want to talk about a crazy industry. How busy, intense, competitive. And there were people, one of my bosses, he slept 4 hours a night. This guy's in his late 30s, and he's doing 4 hours a night of sleep. And how many of you realize that when you do that to yourself, that you're setting yourself up for problems down the road? A good maintenance plan is prioritizing sleep. You need about 7 to 9 hours a night. Now that will shift over time, but that's what you need, whether you think you do or not. You need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and you're laughing again. If you're only getting 3, you know, shoot for 4 next week or something like that. But do we understand that? Here's what happens. We cheer on people who are workaholics. Those are the guys that get the accolades. They get invited to speak at all the conventions. The guys that are telling you it's better to burn out for Jesus than rust out. Listen, either way you're out. Whether you burn out or rust out, you're out. And God doesn't want you to be out. Whatever He's calling you to do, whether it's in the business world, whether it's in vocational ministry, God doesn't want you to be a sprinter. He wants you to be a marathoner. And now is the time to get serious about a game plan. Not when you get in trouble like I got in trouble. I mean, I was hanging on by a thread, guys. I wanted to take my life and was very close to doing that. I don't want any of you to ever get to that spot in your life. And here's the good news, you don't have to. It's preventable. So, questions on those maintenance items? Does that make sense? All right, I'm almost done. We've got 10 minutes, and I'm only going to take a couple. So let me review real quick. Your pace, your people, and your plan. Look, I didn't wake up one morning knowing how to do this stuff. It took me a long time to figure out how to live like this. Because when you're a workaholic, you don't change in a week. It was over the course of years that I began to change how I approached my life. Look, can I encourage you to have a healthy rhythm in your life of work and rest? I'm not telling you how many hours to work in a week, although multiple studies have shown us, especially in the business world, that when you reach about 45 in a week, your productivity just goes off the cliff. And many pastors and leaders work 60, 70 hours a week, and they think they're getting a lot of productivity hours 46 to 70, when in reality you're not. You're just fooling yourself. Can I encourage you to start putting a game plan together so that you can, don't get to the spot where I was overworking because I was afraid. I overworked because I was afraid I wasn't going to have a big enough church. I overworked because I was afraid I wasn't going to make enough money. Just to be totally transparent with you. I was afraid of what other people thought about my work ethic. I didn't want people to think I was lazy. And it drove me into crazy commitment and overcommitment. I don't want you to make the same mistake. And here's what will happen. The frantic pace of culture will want to squeeze you into its mold. The corporate world will want to squeeze you into its mold. The ministry world will want to do the same thing. You know, Doug, we talk so much about how culture has influenced the church. And when we think about how culture has influenced the church, a lot of times we're thinking about moral issues, right? And can I say that our culture has influenced the church in the area of pace more than we know. And we have adopted this Western mindset that says you've got to work 70 to 80 hours. Now look, some weeks you're going to work 70 hours. It happens. You just deal with it, right? But if every week is 70 hours, week after week after week after week, you're tearing emotional muscles that don't have enough time to heal. So let me give you one more scripture. You are such a quiet crowd, but that's okay. Mark 6:30 and 32 says this, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. And then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat. Have you ever been that busy? See, when I eat lunch, I'm planning dinner in my head. That's that Polish-Italian thing again, right? So this whole concept of being so busy you don't have time to eat is really hard for me to get my arms around. But apparently that's what was going on here. Jesus said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some what? Rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. Jesus had this refueling thing figured out. If you study him, whenever there was a big ministry event, either approaching or after, many, many times you'll read these words, Jesus went up on a mountainside to get alone. You know, he did that to pray, but I also believe he did that because he needed some space. He needed some time to recharge his batteries. And if we figure it out, we'll be better leaders. We'll be able to lead longer, lead more effectively, and we'll be able to enjoy it more. I think you can be a leader and enjoy it. It's possible. Isn't that great? You could be a pastor and actually enjoy it. We're pastoring right now a campus plant part-time because I'm doing Converge coaching full-time. And I'm learning that I can be happy doing that work even though it's not necessarily my first love. You know, does that make any sense? Does God ever ask you to do something you just didn't want to do? I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to pastor again because I love working with pastors. I love working with you all. I love writing books. I love doing all that stuff. But he's called me for a season to come back and to function in that role. And Doug and I were talking about that prior to chapel this morning and how there's this pressure I feel. It's 30 seconds after I said, yes, I'll take that on. It was like, you know, one of those lead vests they put on you at the dentist's office when they're taking x-rays? That's what it felt like. Just this, whew. And I said to myself, I don't like that. That doesn't feel good. Lord, how long do I got to wear this? But I think one of the things the Lord is trying to teach me is how to have joy, even when I'm doing something that I don't necessarily feel awesome about and great about. So, we got 4 minutes. Questions? Anybody?